Welcome, Kellogg community. I'm Liz Jackson with the Kellogg School of Management. Thank you for joining us today for Conversations with Kellogg Leaders featuring Salman Amin. In this webinar series, Dean Corneli speaks with Kellogg alumni leaders on timely issues and challenges facing the global business community. You can also catch up on our prior webinars at our virtual events page on the Kellogg alumni website. I'll go ahead and put a link to that in the chat now. Today's presentation will last 1 hour, and we do invite you to submit questions for our speaker at any time using the Q&A icon that's located at the bottom of your screen. We will address audience questions throughout the conversation. And with that, I'm happy to welcome Dean Francesca Corneli.
Hello, everyone. I am so glad to have another one of our amazing conversations, and this time from the Global Hub. I have the person we're about to interview here in person, and it's an amazing alum, Salman Amin, with a career that really exemplifies some of the strengths of Kellogg from, Procter Gamble, and then PepsiCo, and then SC Johnson, to arrive to the CEO of Pladis. So we will have to hear about his experience and insight as a leader in the snacking industry and also working for some of the most prestigious brands in the world. But also personally for me, it's been such a pleasure because Salman is based in London, and when I was named as a dean, I was in London, and is possibly the first of the first two alums I met, and I remember meeting him, and he welcomed me with such a warmth, and he told me I would do anything for Kellogg. So for me, he was really the introduction to the passion that Kellogg alumni have. Welcome, Salman, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. It's truly a great pleasure to be back and just driving in. And we had a chance to take a short walk around the lakefront, brought back so many amazing memories. And it's been a few years, probably 6 or 7 years since I was back on campus. And it's one of those rare, beautiful Chicago summer days. So couldn't have set up a more perfect day to come back to campus.
That's right. So we hope to keep getting you back now. Yes. But let me start asking, and of course people can start putting questions immediately. You joined Pladis as CEO in 2019, right? So let's begin immediately in that. What drew to you this company and this leadership?
Right. I think probably 3 things. It's Pladis is really the holding company for a bunch of businesses. And the first thing for me was the brands. The brands. Truly iconic brands. We have about 75 brands in our portfolio. 7 of them are more than 100 years old. And one of them is 186 years old. In today's day and age, there are not many brands that survive, let alone thrive, for that long a period of time. And we are still in the countries we are in, and this is McVitie's digestives, it's still one of the most iconic and market-leading brands. So the brands was one. The second one was Pladis is a family-owned business. It's owned by a Turkish family. And I spent a lot of time meeting with the family. And I was really drawn to their values. And we spent hours, literally, talking about each other, talking about what does it take to build a legacy, and what they wanted out of the business. So I felt that I was going to be working with people who shared my values. And last but not least, I mentioned this point about legacy, and legacies are important. And in this particular case, what I said to them was, the legacy has to be more than numbers. And if the day I leave Pladis, I want to leave behind not the world's largest company, that's not a goal, but the world's best leadership team. Wow. And it's as simple as that. That's the goal that we are striving for. And that's not easy to do. But I feel we're in a great place because I'm surrounded with amazing leaders who only get better with the passage of time.
That's amazing. And to me, again, like, it so exemplifies the Kellogg spirit, with the focus on the leadership and on the team and on growing a big team. And by the way, I should say that I am addicted to McVitie's cookies. This is like the thing I miss most. Of course, I can get them here, but every time I go to London, I come back with the McVitie's cookies.
Well, we'll make sure you get supplied with endless supplies of McVitie's.
So you started talking a little bit about this company, right? So for anybody like me with a sweet tooth, what should we know beside the McVitie's cookies about the company?
Look, I think the first thing to know is we're not just sweet. We are a complete snacking company.
Yes.
We have savory biscuits under the brand name of Jacob's, which is also another business that's more than 100 years old. So we've built a full portfolio of macro snacking opportunities, from sweet to chocolates to savory biscuits, and we're very proud of that. I think people should also know that we want to be and pride ourselves on being a very agile company. We are not much for bureaucracy. We like to make decisions fast and to just get on with things. When we don't succeed, we learn and we adjust and we move forward again. And last but not least, I think it's important to note that as a result of all of this, one additional reason to consider or know about Pladis is for the last 4 out of the last 5 years, we've been the fastest growing snacking company globally. This is in net revenue in US dollar terms. So our approach is working, and we've been growing double digits for the last, as I said, about 4 years or so. So it really is a fun place to work.
You're making it sound amazing, and I've been visiting you in London, and I could see the energy of your team and the people around. But let me ask you, so you had this amazing business career, but my understanding is that was not the initial plan. Can you tell us about growing up in Pakistan? And
Yeah, so look, it's growing up in Pakistan, through high school, and growing up, you either became a doctor or an engineer. Those were the two things. I was not smart enough to go into medicine, so I went into engineering instead. My undergraduate is in engineering. Then I worked in Chicago. And that led me to coming to Kellogg. And eventually, it led to this particular, you could call it an accident or a fluke, perhaps. I was going to go and work in investment banking out of Kellogg. That's what I wanted to do. And I get a letter in the mail. Remember now, this is ancient times. There was no email. So inviting me to interview with P&G on the closed list. So I did. And within the first 5 or 10 minutes, the interviewer said to me, "You don't know anything about marketing, do you?" And I couldn't lie, so I said, "You're right, I don't." I'd taken the one D30, I think it used to be called back then, course. And he said, "Why are you here?" And I said, "Well, you invited me." So I said, "Should I leave?" He goes, "No, you wasted my hour. Let's just keep chatting." And there you have it. And we chatted, and I said, "Okay, that's it." They're never inviting me again. And lo and behold, they kept inviting me back through 6 or 7 rounds of interviews. At that time, they used to make you take a test as well, like a 4-hour test. Anyway, so long story short, my other offers were in banking, one offer in consumer products, and I took that one, and I've never looked back.
That's a fantastic story of also how you have to try different areas and not being set on a story.
I call myself the accidental marketer.
Well, for being accidental, you've done very well. And so let me ask you though, so your training as an engineer, did it give you some insights that has been helpful for your career?
Yeah, I think what that part of my training or my education prepared me for was not to be afraid of numbers. And to dig behind to understand the why behind the what. What was quite simple for me to get to is the numerical or the quantitative whys. What was a learning for me was the qualitative part of the whys. And then over time, learning to balance the two and merge the two is what's made the difference.
That's a great insight. We do have a lot of engineers. I will start quoting you on this of why they should come. So you also worked, as I mentioned before, also for a brand giant like PepsiCo, right? So what it was like from working and learning on brands like Lay's?
Gosh, I joined PepsiCo in 1995. And it was a very difficult time financially for PepsiCo. In '96, PepsiCo had loads and loads of challenges. And I learned how our senior management reacted and acted on what needed to be done then and there. What decisions to be made. What were the tough calls, but make the tough calls. When it comes to the snacking business, my first 2 years were in beverages. The rest of my 18-odd years were in snacks. And that was the time when PepsiCo was really beginning to grow globally. This is late 90s by then. And for Lay's, there was a lot of questions. Do we grow organically? Do we grow through acquisitions? What should the brand stand for? And it turned out that the right answer was a mix of organic and acquisitions. We made decisions on saying, yes, Lay's will be a global brand. Well, what does a global brand need to have? And one of the big decisions was as simple as flavors have to be local. Why? Because tastes are 100% local in the world of food and snacking. So if you bring flavors that are fundamentally alien, consumers will reject them, but because they're not similar to their palates. So going through that journey of figuring out how would we, in which order, which countries we need to enter, was an amazing learning experience for me. Learning how my colleagues were building agro supply chains, because potatoes have to be local. You can't ship them around the world. They're grown outside of the two tropics. How do you then grow in tropical or subtropical countries? And how do you build a supply chain? Learn from my colleagues on how they were going about establishing that. What seeds to use, what flavors, what advertising. So it was the full gestalt, if you will, of building a business. And it was arguably, for that point in my time, in my career, the greatest rush I could have had was to be a part of that journey.
I can imagine that. It's a great story of seeing it all. But then, so you were talking about all this aspect and, palate, but snack brand really, my understanding, you really need to anticipate or understand the trends of customers, and sometimes they can be like indulgent or going for the healthy, how do you keep on top of it?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to that. One is, one will not succeed in the snacking market if you don't understand what local cuisines and tastes are. And understanding the composition of the foods someone eats in a Vietnam versus a UK versus a Mexico, Brazil, China, etc., is super important, because it allows us to talk to and bring consumers tastes that are familiar to them, but they're also innovative for them. They haven't seen them in a snacking bag. So that was part of it. The other part was to provide choice. And we don't have to decide for consumers, here's the one thing you must eat. Our job is to provide them a palette of choices and let the consumers drive. If they want lower salt, lower fat brands, great, here are options on the shelf. If they want indulgent products, here are some options on the shelf. So it was really about creating the right choices, and some countries you could see very quickly which way they gravitated versus others. And again, that ability to move in an agile way and to structure our innovation pipeline in a way that it allows us to deliver against those tastes was a constant search. And it's a business which requires constant innovation. It's not 2 or 3 product launches a year. Some countries, there might be things coming out 8, 10, 12 times a year, depending on the country.
I'm sure that keeps you and your team very, very, very busy. But so another thing is when we look at consumer packaged good, like for me saying outside, there's a lot of also conglomerates, and so is Pladis, right? And my understanding is the answer is synergies. But how do you really achieve, as a finance professor, it's like, do we really achieve synergies, and how do you get them?
So I think there's layers of complexity to this. In my opinion, of course, working out the numbers and where there are synergies, such as supply chains, distribution networks, assuming that we're calling on the same buyers or the same categories. In some cases, certain capabilities are coming in with the company that you're merging with or acquiring and so on. Those are actually fairly straightforward and one can work out. Where for me the magic or unraveling the riddle is in two areas, the talent and the culture. And the ability to bring two companies together in a way that it's not seen as an alien culture being imposed upon a company, on one company from another, is critical. How do we bring people together and get them to buy into a single mission, right? That's the hidden magic of creating a value over long periods of time, not over 1 year or 2 years. Because the synergies, revenue synergies, cost synergies may take a year, 2 years, maybe 3 years-ish. But the cultural synergies, and how do you bring those together? How do we convince talent to work together? You could have companies which are fundamentally different in org structure. Some are more centralized, some are more localized. Where does the P&L sit? What's the role of the supporting services, right, or the functions? How do they add value? And the level of vertical, horizontal integration. But making people feel they're part of one mission as they come together is for me where the magic has been about, and it takes the longest time to understand. And it's the classic, seek to understand before you seek to be understood. That's the biggest part of the journey for me, and where I think the greatest long-term sustainable value creation takes place.
This is such a Kellogg answer, by the way. I love it. Now, while we were talking, I got a lot of questions. One, actually, following what you were just saying, says, under what scenarios would you sell portfolio companies?
Oh, gosh, if they didn't fit our long-term mission.
Okay.
If we thought they were detracting value, if they were competing in areas or working in areas where they may be performing perfectly fine, but they're not part of where we think we can add long-term value.
That's great. And here also this says, as an investor, the incredible proliferation of entrants across most categories seems to have sometimes troubling implication for the incumbent. Is that how you feel? Do you feel threatened by all the new entrants, or?
No, I love competition.
That is also a Kellogg answer.
I truly love competition. I'll tell you what, every time a newcomer comes in, it makes us better. Because we have to ask ourselves, what is our right to succeed? It's ultimately, it's a game. One of the things I love about consumer products, and particularly snacking, where there's literally hundreds of millions of transactions happening every day all over the world, is I think of it as the greatest democracy on earth, because consumers are, casting their vote with $1, £1, €1, one whatever. Every day they go and they make a choice. They stand in front of a shelf. It's a very small shelf or a big shelf, and they decide for us. And therefore, it's a very humbling business to be in, because consumers are voting, and every Monday morning you look at a sales report and you say, great, or you say, oh my God, this isn't going to do well. And so I love competition coming in, because it helps us innovate better, it helps us be more productive, it helps us inspire our colleagues around the world. So I think competition is fantastic.
I love that. I love that. I can see your smile. I'm like, bring it on. Yes. I hear so many questions. Clearly, you're inspiring a lot. Says, please describe your strategic planning process. Is it a multi-year process?
Yes, it is. Although, as we all know, strategies can't be static.
Yeah.
Because then they're dated very, very quickly. So what we try to do is what we call more like a strategic framework. And there are broader priorities that we set, no more than 3 to 5. At least 2 of them relate to talent and culture every single time. And the rest are about building the capabilities that will allow us to continue to drive differentiation and deliver value to our consumer. And value is not always the lowest price. It's the overall, the lowest sort of attributes and price. So it typically does that. Now, there are questions we're asking all the time within that. Should we be restructuring our supply chain? You know, we have 25 bakeries and chocolateries around the world. How should we be deploying our capital to enhance them? Do we need this many? Should we be doing more co-man kind of alliances? Big strategic questions because they impact hundreds of millions of pounds in our particular case every year of investment decisions that we need to make. Where our competitive set is changing, which categories, subsegments are being created. Because another thing that keeps us on our toes is competing in fast-moving snacking. You're always on your toes because competitors are smart. They look at the niches or unexploited niches and they go after them. And you have to decide, do you follow them or let them go because it doesn't make sense for us? So yes, we're looking at a multi-year, usually 3 to 4 years planning process, but we have a goal in mind. So I know where we would like to be in terms of our cash, in terms of our margins, in terms of our revenue base. Let's say 4 years from now, I know that. But you know, if you're competing in China, it's one thing what the annual plans will be versus the United States. So we try to be very flexible as we move forward, but keeping to those big questions on where we need to pivot and how.
It's very interesting. And I have a lot of questions, but I'm burning to ask you one question, which is, where does the innovation start at Pladis? How is your R&D operation?
Our innovation is always centered on the consumer. Always, always, always. And we are asking ourselves some very fundamental questions. We have a terrific innovation and R&D team globally and in our countries around the world. The one thing they do, I think, better than almost anyone else is understanding how consumer tastes are changing. And what are the things we should be bringing out. And in fact, thanks to their leadership, their efforts, we have more than doubled the delivery of innovation as a % of our net revenue just in the last 5 years, doubled. It's driving far more profitable and sustainable growth because of innovation, because of differentiation. We now have countries which are launching as many as 140, 150 new pieces of news a year. We have other countries doing 10 to 15, depends on the distribution systems that we are deploying. And that's what's allowing us to drive the pace of growth that we are able to. Because in our business, as in many other similar businesses, innovation and growth is our oxygen.
Yes. And connected to that, I see here a question, maybe in spaces. How are you thinking about present and future use of AI?
So I would be less than truthful if I said to you that we are in the front leading edge of AI. We are learning. We have use cases in our supply chain being tested right now. We have built out models that will allow us to nearly fully move many of our bakeries to just about 100% AI run. But we haven't done that because that has other consequences we need to think through. We're using AI for demand planning and our forecasting and how, because when you're looking at thousands of SKUs across thousands and if not tens of thousands of selling points, how do you allocate and build a far more greater, less inventory focused demand planning system? You can throw off a lot of cash because you're far more confident in how much work in process you should be holding, how many raw materials or packaging materials you should be holding. So all of these are being tested by us to see how good can we be and what more do we need to do.
That's interesting. There's probably a lot of that will happen.
And change rapidly.
Yeah. But talking about change or challenges, you started as CEO of Pladis in 2019.
Yes.
And just before COVID, and you had the challenge of COVID and then the rise in the food prices, your inputs, and how have you handled all these challenges?
Yeah, that was, actually I think those were proof points of our ability to build a world-class organization. Let me explain. The big things for us were, because we had put in place an approach to innovation in 2019, we were determined to only accelerate that. The more innovation we put out, the better our business performed even during COVID and the inflation that hit starting in 21. From about late Q3 of 21 through most of 22, the inflation we had, just raw inflation, was approximately 2.5 times our entire procurement budget in a normal year. So these were gigantic numbers, well into the billions of pounds. And so we did have to take pricing because you can't ever let your gross margins suffer. And we did take pricing, and our business kept growing and has, because of the quality of innovation. Because when we were up by 20 pence or 20 cents or 20 euro cents or a real up on pricing, consumers were going to go buy, and they thought that the news we had was good enough for them to pay that little bit extra. The second was much more of a process approach and something my team had to align on. Because we were not coming together in an office, we had to completely change the decision-making process. So what we did was every day from noon to 2 p.m. London time, every one of my directs signed on to a call with me. And every decision we needed to make, we made on the call right there and then.
Wow.
And we did that 5 days a week, sometimes more than 5 when someone had a crisis of some kind, because things were changing so quickly, particularly with labor. And we kept that going for a few months. And that taught us a different way of working. But importantly, from the cultural point of view, it taught us to trust each other. And trust is a core value for me. But then cross-functionally and across the team, once people start trusting the numbers that are coming to them, that everyone's coming with the best intent, it made all the difference. So those two things, I mean, there were many other things that my teams did well, but I would say the innovation side and coming together every day, 2 hours, make the decision there and move on to the next day.
It's amazing how, again, the values play such a strong role. Now, there's so many interesting questions coming, but before I get back to the question, I have to ask you about another of my favorite brands, which is the chocolate, Godiva. Why is that a good fit?
It's a great question. Actually, so just 2 pieces of background which will help answer this. First, Godiva was already part of a sister company owned by the same family. Nice. So when it came together with Pladis a year and a half ago, it really was our chairman asking me to add Godiva to our portfolio for various reasons. But the other important thing to note is we already were a chocolate company too. So if you look at our business in Europe, we had brands like Verkade in the Netherlands, the chocolate business. Our business in Turkey, same thing. massive business with the chocolate side. So we knew chocolate very well. McVitie's has chocolate digestives.
I know them.
We actually are one of the companies that buys its own beans in West Africa. So in Ivory Coast and Ghana, we process our own beans. We make our own chocolate liquor and the chocolate mass, as they call it. So we were already very vertically integrated. We understood the art and how to deal with that and how to make good chocolate. And Godiva's only taught us more because it's a classic Belgian chocolate.
Yes. Well, I have actually a lot of questions. Let me read you one which goes also on Godiva, and it's clearly someone who knows a lot about your business. It says, every CPG in the post-COVID world wants to directly go to consumers, B2C versus through established retailers. Godiva has a direct omni-channel business while McVitie's doesn't. Are you planning to B2C for your legacy brands as well?
So we do, actually. McVitie is about, if you look at the UK, about 12% of the business
Is B2C.
is B2C already, so we have a lot of learnings. Are we the best in the world at that? No, not yet. And even at Godiva, where we have Godiva.com, we can get better. The customer experience when they go to our sites, to be perfectly honest, can be improved. I recognize that. And we will. You'll see a lot of change in the next 6 to 12 months as we gear up the Godiva business differently. It's a luxury premium business, particularly focused on gifting. So there'll be a lot more news coming. So B2C, I see as a very important channel, but it needs to be customized, and we need to understand the economics of B2C probably better than we have in the past.
Interesting. And another interesting question, where does sustainability and the regenerative economic fit into current strategy, especially given cocoa and other short-term climate impacted products?
Yeah. Massive area of focus for us in sustainability. We prioritized carbon to start with. We've made good progress. We invited an outside group called the Carbon Trust, independent third party, to come and audit our entire supply chain from the time agro products like wheat and palm and so on are grown to the time they show up in finished products. We've put those learnings in place, and we are executing them across our system. There's been, clearly, as most people will be aware, a massive price increase in cocoa beans over the last 6 to 9 months, where the price went up 5 times, actually. And that's a cause of a particular disease that hit those countries and the cocoa pods, as well as lack of rains. So we've had to adjust to that. So on sustainability, we're focused there. I think plastics is another area that we are very focused on how we will be recycle ready in majority of our markets by next year, but we have to figure out ways to reuse and refill, which is much harder to do in the food industry because of food standards. So those are somewhat tougher nuts to crack, but we are very committed to working on that.
Interesting. You get a lot of very interesting questions. Clearly, the alumni, Kellogg alumni, how do you think about the split of growth from innovation versus the growth from your base business? Does that change across regions, maturity of brands?
It's a great question. Look, the way I think of this is the core must get innovation to grow as well. Because the reality that I've learned is if the core is weak, any line extension, any other thing a business will not grow without the core being strong. So in my opinion, the core needs as much innovation to keep bringing news and to bring especially our loyal consumers back and back again, because they see different products on the core. Now, that doesn't mean we only do our core. And that's the art of deciding how much should be coming. We think our innovation probably will add 8 to 10 points of the overall growth algorithm year on year.
Yeah.
But, most, especially new to Pladis innovation, by definition, starts with 0. So you have to build those businesses up. And getting the right balance between very near-in innovation to further out innovation is a big part of what we think about. Countries in which we are relatively small, we are much more focused on the core because there's massive headroom for growth, and we don't want to clog up our distribution pipelines. And the supply chains can become too complex too quickly for a relatively small business. Our bigger businesses, which do hundreds of millions of pounds a year, those are more ready to handle a degree of complexity. So we're also keeping an eye on non-value added complexity, lest it creeps in.
Oh, interesting. And talking about growth, right? You sell snacks to consumers in more than 150 countries. And Godiva, for example, is popular in China. So where internationally you hope to grow?
Yeah, so if I look at between, say, 2024 and 29 and 2030, I think there's multiple areas where our growth will come from. We have massive headroom for growth in current markets still. And if you just growing market share where we are is a lot of growth, right?
Yes.
So we should never ever forget the importance of the core in our business. That's one. We have categories that we compete in with excellent brands today in some countries, but not all. So if you look at my savory business, it's a brilliant business for us in a handful of countries, UK being one of them. It's about 28-30% of our total business in the UK is actually savory. But we don't sell it in very many countries. So expanding those categories into other regions, other countries, is a second massive growth potential. Third, with Godiva, now part of the portfolio, we are able to enter more countries than perhaps we could have had 2 or 3 or 4 years ago. Third lever of growth. Fourth lever of growth is with Godiva, we also get to learn boutiques and cafes from Godiva, right? For me, that's been a completely new area of learning. In fact, last year when we first started working with Godiva, I worked as a salesman in one of our boutiques.
Oh, really?
Because I wanted to see what it's like to be behind the counter, right? From taking inventory in the morning to how do you sort of operate a till. I had never operated a till. So these are some of the levers of growth we are looking at. As a result, we're super bullish on where the business is at. And I think our teams are really motivated by the amount of headroom they see for growth.
That is so interesting. And I keep getting so many questions. One is also, how are you embracing the trends of more healthy ingredients and snacks that could deliver added value and also be sourced from sustainable sources?
So again, the two parts to that. One is, the ingredients we use are actually quite simple. It's ingredients like wheat and cocoa and so on. What's important for us is to move to a much more clean labels so consumers can understand what's in the product and why. So that's a big part of our focus as part of our innovation and becoming, because obviously consumers are focused on their health. You are, I am, we all are. So to simplify what we sell is a big part of what we need to do.
That's amazing. And here, I'm changing slightly gears. What is the influence of the family owners in the operation and governance of the company? As you know, at Kellogg, we do a lot on family businesses, so it's very interesting for us.
So my chairman and I meet regularly, either on Teams or in person. He's actually here with me in Chicago this week, attending the Consumer Goods Forum. He and I meet and we talk about the big subjects. Where is the business headed? What are the areas we need to enter? Will there be a new geography from scratch, a complete greenfield? How fast should the expansion be of some of these levers that I was talking about? Capital deployment, cash forecasts. Those are the broader, bigger questions that he and I speak about. And he's intensely interested, as am I, in this area of talent. And,
That is good.
and are we hiring the absolute best people who will inspire others to follow them? You know, think of it this way. I share this with our annual top 100 meeting that takes place. I say, folks, we are awfully privileged. We have 16,000 colleagues around the world. The office-based folks are maybe about 2,500 out of that. Everyone else is on the front line in our bakeries, in our sales force, and so on. We are here to serve them. They don't serve us. It's the other way around. And the more we understand that we have an obligation to them to make sure that they feel good, their families feel healthy, they're earning a fair compensation, they can pay their mortgage, buy a car, etc., the more fulfilled we should feel. And those are the sorts of subjects that we talk about, my chairman and I, and across the company, because our purpose, literally, if you read on our website, our purpose at Pladis is to bring happiness.
Oh, that's an amazing purpose, yes.
But it's not just the fact that our products delight people. We have to live and work in a way that while we will make mistakes from time to time, we continue to never forget our purpose, which is to bring happiness. And that's to all our colleagues.
That is a great story. And there's a question here that a little bit of a continuation in the sense asks, how would you describe your leadership style?
Well, it probably should be best to ask my teams, but I'll tell you there are two values that are super important for me. One is trust, and the other is transparency. Those, if there are two things that I live by, it's those. And sometimes, and what I say to folks about trust, especially people we are recruiting or who joined us, is, look, I never want you to feel that I'm looking over your shoulder. You have 100% trust from day one. That's it, as simple as that. Now, if something goes wrong, and then we'll have a conversation. But just because someone makes a mistake or the decision that's not optimal doesn't mean you lose trust in them. So that's very important for me. Transparency is the cousin to that, the other side of the coin, which means I will speak the truth. We will ask the questions, sometimes hard questions that need to be asked. We'll debate the issues clearly. We won't fudge the issues. And we're going to talk about what we can and cannot get done and why. And that, hopefully, over time continues to remove the mystery of what is it that we need to do. Well, let's talk about what the issues are, and do we, you, I, truly understand the issues behind the issues? Do we truly understand our business, whichever country we are in? I travel a lot, about 2 weeks a month, and in every country that I visit, I'm not looking to critique what people are doing. I'm looking to understand what they're doing and why.
That is such a great answer. And talking about leadership and talent as you did now, you know, in London I have met some of your several of your top women management, and I know you are doing an amazing project to try to promote more women in leadership. I find what you're doing very inspirational. Why don't you say a bit, where is it coming from, where you're going?
So a couple of my colleagues a few years ago suggested that, look, we have this terrific group of female leaders and we need to pull them together. And I sponsored it, but it's their work, created something we call the Women in Leadership Network. And this group has become stronger and stronger over time. It's grown over time. And they come together. I thank you for sparing an entire afternoon and then
I had a great time
speaking with them, because they found you to be a super inspirational figure. And the transparency, frankly, with which you spoke to them about your career trajectory and that some of the challenges you faced, I know there was a huge buzz about that. We also created a program at another business school, your former
My
place,
former, yes, that's okay.
place, if I may say so.
Yes.
And they went on a 1-week-long program there on leadership. And we've continued that focus to bring our female leaders forward, because we still have work to do. We're not at gender parity yet. We're getting closer and closer.
Well, I'm very grateful for you for doing that. That is a great message. Here there's one also a little bit. Could you describe a failed project and what you learned from it?
I think the operative word is learn.
Yes.
Because most of the new innovation will fail. It's very rare to get high hit rates. And the only time it bothers me is if we haven't learned sufficiently. Sometimes we learned that we were working off the wrong assumptions, or we extrapolated in a way that was inaccurate. Other times it's just that we didn't quite get the execution right, in which case maybe we come back to market in 6 months or a year later. So in my mind, if we've learned something from each outcome, we haven't failed, because the organization is wiser.
I actually completely agree with it. And I mean, I see the time is running quite fast, and I always want to ask some question about Kellogg. So you arrived to Kellogg pretty early in your career. What attracted you, and how did you learn from it?
So I tell you, I arrived, when I left, it hit me when I graduated that if there's one thing I learned, it was learning to learn. And recently I was with many of my colleagues and I was talking to them that the world is changing so fast that my own mantra for myself is make sure I don't forget learning to learn. Because you assume that you know everything, and that's like the biggest mistake I can make. So Kellogg, for me, when I arrived, frankly, I was naive. I didn't know much. I was an engineer. I was by the rules, sort of like calculators and, and so on and so forth. I was very used to the absolute right answer. And we had a professor in strategy, he's no longer here, Liam Fahey. And he said in his class, I'm going to teach you tolerance for ambiguity.
Oh, I love that, yes.
And I thought that was such an interesting phrase. And this idea of tolerance for ambiguity has been my friend, has become more and more of my friend with each passing year, because I understand the importance of not waiting, because we sometimes end up as leaders waiting for the perfect answer to the perfect question to put the perfect plan in place. And it's like waiting for Godot. It never happens.
Yes.
So at some point, you have to have a healthy level of tolerance for ambiguity, do the research, etc., and some point say either yes or no, and then move on.
So so this is something you really learned at Kellogg, and you carried
Absolutely.
through your career.
I had never heard the phrase tolerance for ambiguity, because in engineering, of course, if you have tolerance for ambiguity, buildings fall down.
That's right.
So that's a problem. But I had never heard that. And even in the world of business, most of us are uncomfortable with ambiguity. We like certainty in our lives because it's the human condition. But if we build a healthy level of tolerance for ambiguity and make ambiguity our friend, I think we make better decisions and we become better leaders.
That's great, especially also people who are the students who are in school right now that face a world of increased uncertainty. But let me ask you, so you have been part of the Kellogg Global Advisory Board. I had the privilege to have you as on my board. And how do you stay involved with Kellogg? The message we can send to all the alumni, how?
So first and foremost, well, there's multiple ways. One is the advisory board. Cumulatively over the years, about 10 or 12 years, I've been on the board at various periods of time. Taught me a lot, kept bringing me back. Sending students here in the exec ed programs.
Yes, thank you.
I had my CFO here just about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and they come back and they give me feedback. That's another way. Just visits from time to time.
Yes.
gives me a ton of feedback, and I'm just a huge fan of Kellogg, so I follow every bit of news about Kellogg all the time.
I love that. Now, I apologize in advance to all the people I couldn't answer. Let me just finish with one question, which I like, it says, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself at the beginning of the career?
That's a deep psychological question.
Yes.
I think I would be less afraid. Be more confident. Be more assertive. Ask more questions, right?
Yeah.
And some of those I learned along the way. Some of them arguably a little later than I would have liked, with the benefit of hindsight. Accept possibilities, aim higher, and things will come to you.
That is an amazing answer. So, there's so many questions. I don't want to go back to the details of the business because we're doing, but how do you balance, your vision with listen, as you're saying, right? So much you work with the team. How do you balance your ideas with the ones that come from your team? I have to read it better.
I would say the vast majority of ideas come from my team, and it's my job to understand what they are.
That's the Kellogg humility comes out.
No, look, I think this is, someone once said to me, the job of a CEO is just three things. And I forget now who said this, and I've kept it in my mind. There's many definitions out there, and I've just latched on to this one. One is set the strategy, which is making choices. And if there's one thing I have to do, it's to make choices. And making choices is hard, right? So that's one. Second, make sure once you've made the choices, you have the resources to set against those choices. And if you discover you don't, go back and reset the choices. Don't leave people in a limbo. And last but not least, and arguably the single most important piece for me, is ensuring that we have the right people in the right jobs at the right time.
Salman, I had a great expectation knowing you about this interview, but you surpassed them all. I loved it, and I apologize, I say, to the people who are asking still a lot of questions. I feel it's a combination from knowing all the details of your business. I love the example of you sitting on the tail, from the big pictures, leadership, and how you work with your team and you believe in talent. We are so proud to have you as a Kellogg alum, and thank you so much for coming. Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation to join you, and I really appreciate it, and good to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you. And I hope you're all having a great rest of the day, or depending where you're based, maybe it's the end of the day. So good night.